The air conditioner unit outside my window groans, a tired metal beast mimicking the knot in my stomach. It's still early, the city just starting to wake, but I'm already dressed, the fabric of my suit cool and unforgiving against my skin. My fingers trace the rim of a coffee mug, the ceramic warm, a stark contrast to the cold dread that's been my constant companion for weeks. Today is the day. The day I watch it all unravel. Not just for him, but for the ghost of us, for the naive woman who believed in futures built on sacrifice and shared dreams. The sun hasn't crested the buildings yet, but a thin, pale light is bleeding into the sky, washing the room in a sterile gray. It feels appropriate, gray and cold. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Before all this, my life felt solid, built brick by careful brick. I had my work, my own company, something I'd poured years, sweat, and a ridiculous amount of caffeine into. It wasn't glamorous, not in the way some people picture success, but it was mine. Logistics, supply chains, the unsexy backbone of modern commerce. It demanded precision, foresight, a tolerance for endless spreadsheets, and the ability to charm suppliers in 3 different time zones. I was good at it. More than good. I'd built it from a single desk in a rented office to a sprawling operation that kept things moving, unseen, but essential. I was comfortable. More than comfortable. I had resources built through sheer, unyielding effort. I valued independence, the quiet hum of competence that came from knowing I could rely on myself. Then there was Mark. He came into my world like a sudden, warm front. All charm, easy laughter, and a kind of comfortable confidence that was infectious. He worked in his family's business, a manufacturing company with a long history producing components for businesses like mine, ironically. We met at some industry event, me in my sensible suit, him with a tie slightly askew and a smile that promised simpler things. He talked about heritage, about his father and grandfather, the legacy he was meant to uphold. I talked about efficiency and optimizing routes. We were different, but it worked. The difference felt like balance. Like 2 pieces slotting together to make a whole that was stronger, more interesting than either part alone. We fell in love. It felt right. A different kind of right than the quiet satisfaction of closing a complex deal, but just as real, maybe more fragile. We built a life together, quiet weekends, shared dinners, the easy rhythm of 2 people comfortable in each other's space. He talked about the business, sometimes, the usual stresses, but never anything that felt like a tremor beneath the surface. It was just life. Building something together, step by step. I started thinking about our future, about merging our lives fully, maybe even our work somehow. Although my company was strictly mine, a separate entity, a fortress I'd built long before him. But you think about weaving lives together, don't you? You think about shared paths. The first sign that the ground wasn't as solid as I thought came on a Tuesday. Mark was late, which wasn't unusual, but his face when he finally got home was different. Drawn, pale, like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't have his usual easy greeting. He just stood in the hallway, the weight of something invisible pressing down on him. The air in the apartment felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. I asked him what was wrong. He just shook his head, went into the kitchen, and poured himself a drink with hands that weren't quite steady. This wasn't the Mark I knew. The one who could charm his way out of a traffic ticket, who faced minor setbacks with a shrug and a plan. This was a man cornered, a man terrified. He finally sat down, not across from me, but next to me on the sofa, shoulders slumped. He started talking, the words tumbling out hesitantly at first, then faster, a dam breaking. The family business. Generations old. Not just struggling. Dying. Drowning in debt. A legacy of mismanagement, bad investments, changing markets they hadn't adapted to. And it wasn't just debt. It was critical debt. Creditors were circling. The bank was threatening to call in loans. Without a massive, immediate injection of cash, they were finished. Bankrupt. The family name, the factory, the employees who'd been there for decades, all gone. And the number, The number felt unreal. A black hole opening up in our living room. $17 million. The number hung in the air, a physical weight. $17 million. It wasn't just a number. It was the end of his family's history, the destruction of his identity, the collapse of the future we were building. Mark looked utterly broken. He talked about his father, the shame, the panic. He had tried everything. Banks wouldn't lend more. Investors were spooked. He was out of options. The weight of it was crushing him. He wasn't asking me for money, not explicitly. He was just telling me, laying bare the catastrophe that was about to consume his world. But the silence after he finished spoke volumes. The unspoken question hung heavy between us. What do we do? I knew what I could do. The number, while staggering, wasn't impossible for me. My years of work, my careful investments, my company's success, I had access to that kind of capital. But it was my capital, my security, my future, built independently. The thought of pouring it all, or a significant chunk of it, into a failing legacy business felt terrifying, reckless. It went against every instinct I had built my own success on. Logic screamed no. It screamed, walk away. This isn't your mess. But looking at Mark, the man I loved, stripped bare by fear and desperation, logic felt cold and cruel. He wasn't just telling me about a business failure. He was telling me about the potential destruction of his family, his identity, his spirit. He was drowning, and I had the lifeboat. Could I watch him sink? Could I let the man I built a life with lose everything while I stood on the shore with the means to save him? The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't logical. It was emotional, tangled up in love, loyalty, and the terrifying vulnerability of shared futures. I spent sleepless nights wrestling with it. The risk was immense. $17 million wasn't pocket change, even for me. It represented years of relentless work, the foundation of my own security. Pouring it into a business I didn't control, one that was already failing, felt like throwing money into a furnace. I consulted with my financial advisors, discreetly, without mentioning Mark or the specific situation. They were cautious, talking about due diligence, asset evaluation, the red flags of injecting capital into a company with deep-seated problems. They used words like exposure and risk mitigation. Their professional advice was clear. This is likely a bad investment. Protect your own assets. But they weren't looking at Mark's face, weren't feeling the weight of his despair. They weren't in love with the man whose history was about to be erased. The internal debate was a storm. Prudence against compassion. Logic against love. My independent, self-made identity against the intertwined reality of being part of a couple, a potential family. I thought about the future we talked about, the life we were building. Could that life exist if Mark lost everything? Could we survive that kind of devastation? I made the decision not with a sound business plan, but with a leap of faith, a desperate hope that love and loyalty could somehow defy the harsh realities of the market. I would do it. I would find the $17 million. I would pay off the debt. Accessing the funds was a process. Liquidating some investments, leveraging others. It felt surreal, signing papers that moved such a colossal sum out of my control, out of the safe harbor I had built. Each signature felt like a piece of myself being chipped away. The money went directly to the creditors, erasing the debt that was strangling Mark's family business. There were hushed, emotional phone calls with his parents, tears, overwhelming gratitude. Mark was overwhelmed, relieved. He held me tight, whispering thanks, promising everything would be different now. That he would rebuild, that our future was secure because of me. He looked at me like I was a miracle worker, a savior. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like the right decision. The sacrifice felt worth it. We had stared into the abyss, and I had pulled him back. The air between us felt lighter, the future suddenly, impossibly, bright again. But that brightness was fleeting, a fragile illusion. After the initial wave of relief subsided, something shifted. Subtly at first. Mark seemed to stand a little taller. The crushing weight was gone, replaced by a new kind of energy. Not the humble gratitude I expected, but something harder, something sharper. He became different. More confident, yes, but also more dismissive. He started talking about the business constantly, about his plans, his vision, the future he was building. My role in saving it, the $17 million sacrifice, became less a shared victory and more a background detail, a problem he had solved, with my help, yes, but fundamentally his achievement. The narrative in his head, I suspect, began to rewrite itself. He was the hero who pulled his family back from the brink, now free to lead. My money was just a tool he had utilized. He started spending more time at the factory, late nights, weekends. When he was home, his mind was elsewhere. Conversations revolved around his challenges, his triumphs, his employees. My company, my work, the stresses and successes of my own business felt increasingly irrelevant to him. He'd nod politely when I talked about a complex negotiation or a new logistics challenge, but his eyes would glaze over. His world had shrunk to the four walls of his family's factory, and I was slowly being edged out of it. The man who had clung to me in fear was now pushing me away with his newfound confidence. The partnership felt unbalanced. I had given everything, and in return, I was getting distance. A polite dismissal. Then he started making comments. Casual, seemingly innocent remarks that chipped away at my confidence, at my role. If I offered an idea about streamlining their supply chain, something I knew intimately, he'd smile patronizingly and say, "Oh, that's how your world works, darling." Manufacturing is different. If I questioned a business decision he'd made, one that seemed short-sighted or risky, he'd shut me down. I know what I'm doing. I saved this company. We saved this company. I wanted to scream. I saved this company. But the words would catch in my throat. The subtle dismissal escalated. It wasn't just ignoring my advice. He started talking about my work, my company, with a similar dismissiveness. Must be nice to just deal with paperwork, he'd say, after a long day at the factory. Paperwork that generated the $17 million that saved him. The irony was a bitter pill. The turning point, the moment the subtle shift became a seismic crack, came during a dinner with his family. His parents were effusive in their thanks to me, still genuinely grateful. But Mark interrupted his father mid-sentence. Yes, we're all very grateful to my name for helping out, he said, his tone light, casual, but with an underlying edge. But it was my vision, my leadership, that really turned things around. Getting rid of the dead weight, streamlining operations. He gestured vaguely, then specifically towards me. Thinking differently. You have to be ruthless in business, ruthless. The word hung in the air. Did he see me as dead weight? The woman who'd poured her life savings into saving his world? The casual cruelty of it stunned me into silence. Later that night, I confronted him. Gently at first. Asking about the changes, the distance, the comments. His reaction was swift and cold. He accused me of being insecure, of not understanding the pressure he was under, of trying to undermine him. He wasn't the grateful partner anymore. He was an executive, puffing out his chest, resentful of any perceived challenge to his authority. That night, lying awake beside him, the distance between us felt like an ocean. The man I loved had vanished, replaced by a stranger who saw my sacrifice as a transaction, one that had given him power he was now using against me. The pain of the betrayal was a physical ache. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the fundamental breach of trust, the distortion of our shared history. I had given everything, and he had taken it, not just the money but the narrative, the credit, and now my place beside him. The first few days after that felt like walking through a fog. Disbelief warred with hurt, anger with confusion. How could someone do this? How could he do this? The world felt tilted, unstable. The sanctuary of my home felt cold, filled with unspoken accusations and the heavy silence of a relationship dying. I tried talking to him again, cooler this time, trying to appeal to the man I thought I knew. It was useless. He was armored, distant, focused entirely on his newly saved kingdom. Then came the final blow. Not unexpected, not after the shift in his behavior, but devastating nonetheless. He wanted me out. out of the house we shared, out of his life. He framed it as needing space, needing to focus, saying that my presence, my constant questioning, my basic attempts at conversation, was a distraction. He used clinical, detached language. It wasn't an argument, not a shouting match. It was a pronouncement, delivered with the same cold detachment he might use to lay off an employee. "I think it's best if you move out," he said, not meeting my eyes. "For now. I need to focus on the business. This isn't working." This isn't working? After I paid $17 million to save everything he held dear? The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. He was discarding me now that he'd used me. He was kicking me out of our home, effectively firing me from the life I'd invested in, personally and financially. The pain was sharp, visceral. It felt like being punched in the gut. But beneath the pain, something else was starting to stir. Something cold and hard. Humiliation burned like acid. He thought he could just take my money, take my support, take my belief in him, and then discard me when I was no longer convenient. He thought he had won. He thought he was free, unburdened by debt or the person who had lifted it from him. He saw me as a solved problem, an expenditure with no further utility. He was consolidating his power, securing his position, and I was simply an obstacle, an awkward reminder of where he had been. He had become the ruthless businessman he admired, and his first act of ruthlessness was against me. Everything felt lost. The money was gone, sunk into a business I was now persona non grata in. The relationship was dead, poisoned by betrayal and arrogance. My home felt alien. The future I had envisioned, built on love and partnership, had evaporated, leaving behind a bitter void. I was out, alone, financially vulnerable in a way I hadn't been in years, certainly not since before I built my own success. He was thriving, seemingly, buoyed by the salvation I had provided, building his empire on the foundation of my sacrifice. Friends tried to comfort me, offering platitudes about moving on, about the money being a lesson learned. A $17 million lesson.
It was easy for them to say.
They hadn't looked into the eyes of the man they loved and seen a stranger. They hadn't felt the gut punch of being used and discarded. The despair was deep, suffocating. There were days I could barely get out of bed. What was the point? I had given so much, risked so much, for someone who valued it so little. The unfairness of it was a physical weight. I replayed conversations, looking for signs I'd missed, moments where the mask had slipped. Was he always like this? Or had the pressure, the debt, the sudden relief of it, warped him? It didn't matter. The result was the same. I was out, and he was moving on, seemingly without a backward glance, definitely without the crippling debt I had absorbed. He was free. And I was what? A fool? A casualty of his ambition? He had won. He had kept his family's legacy, preserved his status, and emerged from the crisis stronger, while I was left reeling, diminished. Then, one morning, sitting alone in a temporary apartment that felt sterile and cold, staring at a future that looked bleak and uncertain, something shifted. The exhaustion, the despair, the crushing weight of humiliation it didn't lift. It solidified, hardened. It became a cold, quiet anger. An anger so pure, so focused it felt like a blade being sharpened inside me. He thought he was ruthless? He thought he understood power and control? He thought he could use me, discard me, and walk away clean? He had taken everything, but he had underestimated one crucial thing. He had underestimated me. He had seen my willingness to sacrifice as weakness, my love as naivety. He had forgotten the woman who built her own empire, brick by painstaking brick, in a world that wasn't always kind. He had forgotten how I fought for every deal, negotiated every contract, navigated every crisis in my own business. The turning point wasn't a sudden burst of fiery rage. It was a cold, calculated decision. I would not be a casualty. I would not be a footnote in his story of triumph. He wanted to play ruthless? Fine. I knew his world. I knew how businesses like his worked. I knew their dependencies. And I knew, with absolute certainty, his most critical vulnerability. His main supplier. The company that provided the essential components his factory needed to function. Without them, his production line stopped. His contracts couldn't be fulfilled. The saved family business would grind to a halt, perhaps even faster than it would have under the weight of the old debt. It wasn't just a supplier, it was his lifeline. The idea took root, not as revenge, not initially, but as a primal urge for survival, for balance, for correcting a fundamental injustice. He took my foundation, I would take his. My company specialized in logistics and supply chain. I understood suppliers, their businesses, their financial structures, their vulnerabilities. I started researching his main supplier, discreetly at first. A medium-sized company, family-owned, much like his had been, but with different pressures, different needs. They had been a reliable partner to Mark's family for years, maybe too reliable, too comfortable. I dug deeper. Their financials, their ownership structure, their potential pain points. And I found one, a significant one. The aging owner was looking to retire. The next generation wasn't ready or willing to take over. They were quietly exploring options. Selling. A plan began to form, cold and precise. It wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about leverage, about control, about using the skills I had honed over a lifetime to reclaim my agency, to correct the scales that had been so brutally tipped against me. He had used my resources. I would use my expertise. I wouldn't just get back at him. I would demonstrate, in the most undeniable way possible, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life when he thought he could discard me. The process of acquiring the supplier was complex, time-consuming, and required every ounce of my business acumen and financial muscle I had left, or could access. It wasn't a hostile takeover, not exactly. More of a strategic alignment. I approached the owner through layers of intermediaries, presenting a compelling offer, one that secured their legacy, provided for the family, and offered stability for their employees. My reputation in the logistics world, the quiet competence I had built, opened doors. They weren't just selling to a buyer. They were selling to someone who understood their world, someone who could integrate their operations seamlessly into a larger, more resilient structure. The negotiations were intense, unfolding over weeks, requiring absolute secrecy. Every conversation was guarded, every document encrypted. I worked from a different office, surrounded by a small, trusted team who knew nothing of my personal motivation, only that this was a high-stakes acquisition, a significant expansion of our capabilities. I pored over contracts, analyzed financials, navigated legal complexities. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and fueled by a cold, relentless determination. Mark remained oblivious. He was too busy basking in the glow of his saved company, too consumed with his own plans, his own power. He had no idea the ground was shifting beneath his feet. He had no idea the woman he had discarded was meticulously dismantling the very foundation his success rested upon. Finally, the deal was done.
Signed.
Sealed. The supplier, his lifeline, was now mine. My company's. The ink on the contract was barely dry, still smelling faintly of chemicals, when I initiated the second phase of the plan. Cutting off the contracts. Not all at once, not in a way that could be easily litigated as malicious intent, although my intent was laser-focused. No, it was strategic.
Phased.
Necessary business adjustments. The supplier company, now under new ownership, mine, conducted a review of its existing contracts. Some were deemed and profitable in the new structure. Others required renegotiation, with terms Mark's company couldn't possibly meet. The largest contracts, the ones he relied on most heavily, were simply terminated, citing operational conflicts with the new parent company's strategic direction. Standard business practice. On paper. The notices were sent out simultaneously, carefully timed. Legal, binding, undeniable. I wasn't present when Mark received the news. I didn't need to be. I could imagine it. The initial confusion. The calls to the supplier going unanswered, or met with polite, corporate deflection by my newly acquired staff. The dawning horror as he realized the scale of what was happening. His production line stopping. Orders backing up. Clients calling, demanding explanations, threatening penalties. His saved company, the legacy he had so ruthlessly protected, crumbling not under the weight of old debt, but under the sudden, surgical severing of its vital supply chain. I heard about his reaction through the industry grapevine, a network of whispers and rumors that travels faster than any official announcement. He screamed. He yelled. He scrambled. He called everyone he knew, trying to find alternative suppliers, anyone who could provide the specialized components he needed. But I had done my homework. Those components weren't easy to source elsewhere, not quickly, not reliably. And even if he found someone, the cost, the delay, the disruption, it would be crippling. He realized too late exactly what I had done. He realized the $17 million wasn't the end of the story. It was the setup.
The bait.
He had thought he could use me and walk away. He had thought my worth was limited to the size of my bank account. He had forgotten the mind behind the money. The ruthlessness he admired? I had just shown him what it truly looked like. And it was wearing my face. The feeling wasn't triumph, not pure, unadulterated joy. It was colder, a profound, weary satisfaction, a sense of balance restored, but at an immense cost. The saved family business, the one I had sacrificed my security for, was now collapsing. Not because of external forces, but because the person who saved it had, ironically, become the instrument of its demise. My $17 million was gone, yes, effectively vaporized in this act of strategic destruction. But he had paid a higher price. He had lost everything, not just the business, but his perceived victory, his arrogance, his carefully constructed narrative. He had underestimated the quiet woman who handled paperwork, and she had used that paperwork, those supply lines, those unseen networks, to bring his world crashing down. The silence in my small apartment now feels different. Not heavy with despair, but quiet with resolution. It's over. The fight is done. What happened to Mark? I don't know the specifics. His company is likely gone, consumed by its inability to produce. His family. I don't know how they reacted. Their savior became their undoing, an unintended consequence of their son's betrayal. The relationship, of course, is a ruin. Beyond repair. The bridge is burned, the ground scorched. The $17 million is a ghost between us, a monument to a love that was conditional, a sacrifice that was exploited. I lost a relationship, a home, a significant chunk of my wealth. But I didn't lose myself. I didn't let him define me by his betrayal. I fought back, not with emotion, but with strategy, with the very skills he had dismissed. The lesson isn't just about the dangers of mixing money and relationships, or the cost of betrayal. It's about worth. He thought my worth was limited to what I could provide financially. He didn't see the strength, the intelligence, the resilience that built that financial capability in the first place. He saw the $17 million as the whole story. I showed him that the real power wasn't just in the money I had, but in the mind I possessed. The woman who paid off the debt was also the woman who could pull the plug. It's a cold comfort, perhaps. A victory that feels more like surviving a war than winning a prize. But it is undeniably a victory. I am still standing. Changed, yes, scarred, but standing. And I learned that sometimes, the quiet ones, the ones dismissed as just handling the paperwork, hold the keys to the kingdom. Or the sharpest knife to dismantle it. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life. Thanks for being here.